Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be, across the nation or around the world. Once again, you are listening to the VMware Community's Roundtable Podcast. This is podcast number 545. My name is Eric Nilsson, and with me today, I have my special co-host, Corey Romero. Today is Wednesday, March 3rd, 2021. Corey Romero, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Eric. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Excited. But weather is beautiful. I know that we got the color of the bay. It's beautiful 70-degree weather in California. It feels like winter is over. We're entering into the dry season, and that was the end of that. So it's nice to have good weather. How's it out there in Utah?
Fantastic. Cold. We had another snowstorm roll in, but we're starting to see spring around the corner. We're starting to see these cold days, and then we see warm days, and so we're starting to see a good mix, which is usually a pretty good hint for Utah that spring is just right around the corner for us.
That's good. It's nice to be through the bulk of winter, at least some of it. So blossoms are out here on the cherry trees and on the citrus trees. So excited about the good weather that's here. On this show today, we're going to be talking to Vladimir Velikov, and we're going to be covering some of the new things in vSphere 7 with regard to the plugin architecture that's there. So the new vSphere UI and plugins in 7.0 Update 1. So Vladimir's here. He actually is, I think I let Vladimir tell us who he is. Vladimir, why don't you tell us, who are you and what do you do at VMware and how long have you been here and what has your career arc been before we get into the topic?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Eric. My name is Vladimir Velikov and I'm senior engineer in the vSphere UI team. So responsible for plugins, UI extensibility, API design. I'm also working with partners a lot to integrate on UI level. And I've been part of certain initiatives like Cross vCenter vMotion, also the VMware Event Broker appliance, and like latest initiative in the community is more UI engineers joining the V community in the form of vSphere UI community team, which we announced last month.
Very nice. And how many years at VMware? Did I miss that?
It's 5.
5 years.
Before that, I was doing embedded development for GPS systems in cars.
And you got a nice background there. I might even see a VMware Code logo up on the whiteboard there. I think so.
It says VMware Code rules, but you probably can't read that because it's too bright here.
Very nice. Yeah, you got at least a whiteboard, so maybe you're somewhere in an office, right? Like versus your home.
First time in the office since this time last year.
Wow.
Wow, there you go. So, was it weird to commute? Did you struggle with the idea of having to drive to the office? How did that feel?
Actually, I really enjoyed that. It's like no one in the office, but yeah, you have time to think.
Yeah, that is true. I tried to drive to the office maybe a month ago, and I was like, stoplights were frustrating because I'm not used to having to wait to get to my office anymore. And it was like, I had to wait through like 7 stoplights. And I was like, this is frustrating. This took me like 20 minutes of wait time. I'm just not used to having to do that anymore. So, yeah, but at least it is. Yeah.
In my case, it's kids not screaming. So this is good.
Nice. All right, so there's been some things going on. You've moved into the UI space. Why don't you give us a little update of kind of like where you guys are when it comes to vSphere UI? I know we transitioned from obviously the Flash stuff to HTML to now we're here in HTML5 land. It seems like everybody's pretty good with that. Then they have the UI interfaces that have been out there. We open source that. Why don't you explain that journey to us, and then we'll get into what's new with 7 and the plugin architecture, and go from there.
Yeah. So when I joined VMware, we were just in the middle of transitioning to the Flash client. Which turned out to be probably not the best of things.
Right.
Yeah, obviously customers didn't like too much the Flash, especially with its issues with performance, and it's actually the performance issues were partly because of the Flash, partly because of all the migration that had to be done with regards to using the right APIs and so on. It was also a migration from a desktop client to a web-based client, and all the issues involved with browsers.
Right. The number
Yeah.
one thread on VMTN, by the way, like more posts on that thread than any other thread we've ever had, with maybe the exception of the CPU tax when we decided to license per CPU, and that one also was a hot topic. But yeah, the UI topic on VMTN was a very popular topic for many years. But it has calmed down now, right? Like, so the world has kind of gotten in much better shape.
Yeah, and part of it is also because there was a significant effort to improve the Flash client and make it perform well. So there were different efforts, like different data channels for the core UI and for the integrated plugins, so that you can see the UI. And then if a plugin is slow, it can be just loading in the background.
Right.
Yeah, and obviously the next step was the HTML client, and I think the approach there was great, to use the Flings, which I think yesterday turned 10 years of age, which is a really great program. Right. So we were able to ship features there, get feedback, allow people to complain, and subsequently improving performance. But also, this was a smart port. It was not like we just take whatever was in the Flash and move it over to the HTML.
Right. And at some point, I think in vSphere 7, we actually got most of all the features done, right? Like, I mean, there was a time when there was like 70% of the features were in the web client, and 80% were in the web client. And now I think we're at the point where almost all the major features that anybody ever wanted is now in the web client, and most people are over in the web client being happy, right?
Yeah, it's feature parity was announced in 6.7 U1. So since then, it's there's parity. Obviously, not all features would be at the same places because, as I said, it's a smart port, so right. New UX concepts and so on.
Yeah, nice. Okay, that brings us up to kind of current, where also there is this whole idea that we've been acquiring companies over time, and we've had to expand the concept of vCenter and like all the components that are in there. How are we doing with regards to a single pane of glass and being able to bring additional features into vCenter and the UI?
Yeah, this is where plugins really come into play, because with each acquisition, there is a new product, or we come up with a new product, and this product normally needs to have some kind of monitoring and management. So the first step, obviously, is to create some kind of UI, which is sometimes standalone. The same goes for third parties. They create their backup solution, for example, and they create a UI on top of that. But for the user, for the VI admin, this means that they have to open a number of browser tabs there,
right,
and switch between them, losing context. So in the vSphere client, I have this VM. Now let's find it in the other UI. So we have been working with all the teams internally and with the external teams to do UI integration of these solutions as UI plugins. So we've provided a number of extension points in the vSphere UI, which are coarse-grained, which means that you don't have a vSphere UI with plugins scattered around the different screens. You have specific points where they plug into, and and they are very few. So like at the global level, and for each of the vSphere managed objects, it's like summary, monitor, and configure, and they own their content there in an iframe.
when this gets delivered, how many? I guess it's like how many have we had? When did this become real? Was it in 7 or was it in 6 dot that the plugin architecture started? We started populating plugins.
We've been having plugins since the desktop client. Then in the Flash client, we also had a lot of integrations, and we really polished it with the HTML client.
Right.
Now we support 2 architectures, so the local plugin architecture and the remote plugin architecture. Basically, the difference is that with local plugins, which is like the old architecture, you have the plugin code running inside the vCenter, and its middle tier serves as a way to send requests from their UI to their backend. But that can be a problem, especially in VMware Cloud on AWS, where you can't afford to have third-party code running inside the vCenter. It's very difficult to control stability. And from a different point of view, you can't frequently upgrade vCenter, which you really need in the public cloud, because some solutions require to be upgraded before upgrading vCenter. Others require to be upgraded afterwards. Some of them are not compatible with the new version, and so on.
Right.
So this is how we ended up with remote plugin architecture, which essentially at its core allows the UI pieces of the plugin to call directly their backend server through the reverse proxy of the vCenter. And this way there is no plugin code running in the vCenter. It's running only in the browser, and the rest, mainly the backend logic, the business logic, is in the plugin server.
Right, that makes sense. So yeah, you're just doing the connection. Your browser then runs the plugin and then connects to vCenter that enables the function in the GUI, but it's really just a browser plugin or a browser compiled thing that runs in the browser, and then you're just delivering it from a remote server.
Yeah, correct. So, and the vSphere UI platform enables this communication.
Right. Now, just forgive me for being basic here, but how many are out there today? Like, I know we've introduced this. Are customers getting involved in this, or is this kind of a vendor kind of build the plugin and then deliver it? Do we have a delivery mechanism for these things?
Yeah. So we've had in the past, like in the Flash client, like 50 plugins.
Right, which were
now all these have migrated to and maybe to 100. All these have migrated to the HTML client as HTML plugins, and now many of them are migrating to the remote architecture, which allows them to have multi-version support, to eventually be listed in VMware Cloud. Yeah, but we are seeing more and more adoption, especially now. Last September, I believe, VMware announced the vSAN data persistence platform, which essentially allows VI admins to deploy ready pre-cooked Kubernetes services on top of project-specific supervisor clusters. And these services, by design, define a UI plugin, which is a remote plugin following the new architecture. And with the adoption of these, I believe the number of plugins will grow even more. And also, it's completely in line with the modern apps direction of VMware. So this is also one of the reasons we announced that we are going to deprecate local plugin architecture and focus only on remote plugins as a great way forward.
Yeah, and when did we make that announcement? Is that part of the 7 Update 1 announcement, or how long have we
No,
announced that?
we announced to partners that we are going to deprecate
Got it.
local plugins in the next major release.
Okay.
So whatever the number would be, this is where we will announce deprecation. We will still support it for one more major release, and in the follow-up major release, we can delete it basically.
Okay, so that kind of brings us up to where we are today, right? Like in a sense, and then we do have the update 1. So maybe we should chat about like, so what's new? What are we seeing? I know we're doing real time development these days, where the updates now tend to have more features. What are the things that you're now introducing?
Yeah, so in 7.0 GA, we introduced the plugin autodiscovery. Which produces a better experience for the administrator. So in the past, the vSphere UI would detect plugins only at first login, and if they are removed, you basically needed to restart the vSphere UI service from the vCenter, which is a bit tedious, and there were a lot of questions from folks like, I just tried this plugin
And it didn't work.
I didn't like it. I unregistered it and it's still there,
Right.
So we made this really live. So whenever a new plugin is registered, we show a notification. You have a new plugin. Just refresh the browser to load the UI. You remove the plugin registration, it disappears on the next refresh of the browser.
Nice. So dynamic load and unload of plugins in real time. Nice.
Yeah, this is really what the modern user would expect from vSphere.
Right. It's easy to say that, but it's another thing to implement it, right? And get it right.
Yeah. Property collectors and so on.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And so that's nice. And with 100 out there, our customers, when we talk about flings, and I'm just bouncing all over the place here, but we talk about flings and being able to add plugins, right? Like, and then host them and enable them. How is that working, right? And our customers starting to build their own kind of customized plugins for various features?
Well, I wouldn't. So there are customers who would do that. Like they would build a simple custom UI for their own purposes, but mostly it's partners building solutions. Right. On top of that, we also heard that there are some service providers who are doing that as well. So they are building a plugin and using that as part of their offering, SaaS offering, or just like cloud offering on top of vSphere.
Right, I could see where that would be nice, and that does, as you were describing it, I did want to ask another question with regard to the architecture, which is if I build my plugin, it's running in the browser, it's talking. How does it talk back to the vCenter? vCenter, is it using APIs to make calls when it needs to? Like, say, I'm building a plugin and I want it to do X, Y, Z. How do I interact with vSphere to have it do functions that I'm offering up in the GUI?
Yeah, so the UI resources are loaded from the plugin server, and we have an API on the front-end side, which would basically allow the front-end code of the plugin to get the current context, the selected VM, for example. Right. To get user settings like the date time format, the language, which is currently selected, and also to get the plugin server info as registered in the vCenter. And subsequently, the plugin backend would talk directly to the vCenter using the other APIs, which are the vCenter APIs, the vSphere Web Services SDK. Yeah, and there's also the session and authentication part, which is also provided by the front-end API.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. That's the architecture. It's all API driven. Once I
Right.
get context, I'm starting to provide GUI interaction. Then I'm just calling APIs to cause things to happen.
Yeah, and
So
there's an additional significant benefit of this model, and it is the multi-version and multi-instance support, as we call it. So with local plugins, with each new version of a plugin, the partner, if they wanted to support like 6.5, 6.7, and 7.0, the new plugin would have to know all these APIs and talk all these APIs to these old versions of vCenter, which becomes a nightmare in the long run. So they had to basically cut back on their compatibility matrix. So they would say, oh, we support only the last two versions, and that's it with this
right.
plugin. While with remote plugins, you have a one-to-one relationship between the vCenter and the plugin server. So it means that if you have a linked mode with 6.5, 6.7, and 7.0, each of these can have their own instances of the plugin server attached to them that know the specific APIs, and the plugin will have to speak only the APIs of the specific vSphere version.
So
And
the
then in 2 years' time, when we get 8.0 or 10.0, you would be able to link the latest and greatest vCenter to this environment with the latest and greatest solution from the vendor attached to it, and it will still work
Yeah, the
without.
plugin
Yeah.
the plugin server does the brokering and the handshaking, and the plugin server is just being the API judge, right? And if you're building a plugin, you're just talking to the plugin server, and the plugin server determines what it's talking to and how to talk to the vCenter of the vSphere of choice, running or ESX, whatever, who's doing the API serving. There's like a middleman that's doing the conversion. So therefore, your plugins stay compatible because your vCenter server plugin server actually does the brokering, right?
Uh, yeah,
Ish.
and you can have separate instances of this plugin server that are dedicated to a specific version of vSphere.
Right. Okay. So depending on which plugin server you connect, it could do that brokering.
Right,
Right.
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 And there are the parts on the UI where you can say, I want to see the UI of this plugin from this instance or from that instance.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Oh, well,
Yeah. Right.
obviously, if you select a VM from a particular vCenter, it's obvious which instance this is.
Right. But that gets that yeah that's way more flexible because now you have that middle layer that then allows you to just do that, and so you can actually have a data center that has different versions of things, and you don't have plugins that don't work anymore, right? Yeah,
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 correct.
much more flexible. Well, that's interesting. So that's that's kind of the your updated architecture in 7.0 update 1. Are there other things that you want to talk about here as regards to what's
Yeah,
new?
when we're talking about multi-version support, so we should also talk about consumption of new APIs. So we as the SDK and plugins team, we've discovered the need, or it was requested by partners, to have a new API about something. So we release it, we are happy about it, but at this point in time, there are 0 partners who are leveraging this API and 0 customers who are using this version of vSphere. So partners are like, yeah, let's wait a bit for the adoption of this vSphere version by customers. So 1 year might pass, and only then they would look into the API, and for their next version, they would like ship the latest and greatest, which so we don't get the immediate feedback, and that can be a problem. So we are a bit conservative in that regard, but we are also enabling ways for partners to adopt new APIs without being concerned of of how this would play out between versions. So this is why in update 1 we introduced the multi-manifest, plugin multi-manifest. Essentially, it allows you to specify a manifest for the 6.7 version and a manifest for the 7.0 version. In the 7.0 version, you can consume the latest and greatest APIs. In the 6.7 version, you can use whatever is available in 6.7. So this way, runtime, a plugin can discover whether it's running in 6.7 or in 7.0, and turn on the new features or turn them off.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice.
Yeah.
It's kind of an official handshake between the broker and the plugin, right? Where it can figure out what version it is and then understand what APIs, so like the API contract and the manifest for that API contract can be exposed. And then
Correct.
if you're a plugin writer, you can decide to go ahead and do 7.0 because now you can just choose which API to use based on that manifest.
Correct. So this is the way you can specify separate feature sets depending on where you're running.
Nice. All right, so that's new. These are interesting technologies. Probably not going to hit an IT administrator, when you get update 1, because again, this is just functionality that'll be there for the guys that are building plugins and then want to test their plugins against this release to make sure that it's behaving properly. Right?
Yeah, that's correct. So for customers, the customer is also a very important actor here because they are customers of both VMware and the vendor. So the feedback loop here is very important so that we ensure stability from our side, and we can also discuss with partners about what customers really want going forward.
Right. This just reminds me of how Apple has, moved their device recognition forward year after year. If you, in the old days, you would have a new device driver, you'd have to go figure out how to get it, and maybe it'd be there, maybe it wouldn't. But over time, they built manifests. They built a way for all the devices you're plugging in to either be there or automatically download and be there. And so it became a non-issue, right? Over time, you forgot. Like if I talk to my kids, they'll be like, "What do you mean you plug things in and they don't work?" Right? Like they just don't even understand that concept because it has matured. So to some degree, over the next 5 years or whatever, this whole idea of a plugin nightmare, which currently affects current customers, because when you go to upgrade, you have to deal with all your plugins right before you can do an upgrade. Over time, as this rolls out 5 years from now, people might not look at plugins the same way and just assume that they magically do the right stuff.
Yeah, and they just select what features and capabilities they want. And so here we are basically touching on the importance of the user experience, and user experience not in the sense of the color of the buttons, but in the sense of what workflow you're going through when you open the UI. Do you have to leave the UI, in this case the vSphere UI, to do something else elsewhere? Yeah, I know administrators love their terminal. I'm not going to take it away. But jumping to different UIs, it's certainly not the way forward. So we are seeing really convergence of UIs, better and deeper integration of UIs, both from vendors and also in our internal offerings, also in the cloud. So probably a service starts with its separate UI, and over time you see how it converges into a few UIs converge into one another to define a single experience.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up, which in our land, we've been talking, next year's goals. What do we try to accomplish, right? And one of them is, how seamlessly do we operate in the cloud, right? And the way we used to operate in the cloud, or not in the cloud, but with vSphere, is that we got a bunch of heavy IT people that know how to do this stuff. Open up their shell tool. I got 15 shell tools up in my Mac at any given time with 3 monitors sitting here, and I love that, right? But new cloud buyer, right? They're a different, they expect to be able to mouse click, things pop up, it behaves properly, and you use the service, and you're spending less time over on VMTN and forums posting question and answer and learning, because the magic has gone away, right? We just make it work, and you're expected just to click and get notified when a new plugin feature is available for you, right? Just be in the cloud. And that's the difference between the cloud experience going forward and our traditional experience at the same time. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, so I do see these things converging over time, and also I think we're also focused on getting a richer and richer ecosystem, which is integrating on the grounds of very clear rules and extensibility models.
Yeah, and this comes back to the HTML5 maturity now, where because HTML5 has become mature and it works well and customers are happy with it, we can spend less of our engineering time just trying to fix brokenness, right? And actually spend more of our engineering time doing the more sophisticated architectural components that allow this to be kind of a seamless experience, right?
Exactly. So what I'm seeing internally is that engineers around me are really focused on building the new stuff, Kubernetes, project specific, and so on. And also we shouldn't disregard the small improvements, the small features that are added to the UI, because actually one of the reasons I started blogging and joined the V community was that I saw the What's New blogs, and you would basically see 1 or 2 things from the UI team there, just because they are not big enough to make the news, but still these things solve someone's problem and solve it well. So that's why I think we need to talk more about that, these small things, and really tips and tricks how an administrator can use the UI more effectively and have time for everything else.
Yeah, and I appreciate you coming and spending time with us, and we'll definitely have you come back, because there is that bit. Sometimes I tell people, when you go to a VMUG, and they're presenting, we ask how many people are actually using Kubernetes today, and like there's 200 people in the room and only 7 people raise their hand. That was like 2 years ago, so it's like, but even cloud services, you have to remember that there's a lot of people still running vSphere traditionally, and they like those features, and that's a lot of where we focus as well. I got to ask you, I got to imagine the team is happier these days, because instead of living in Flash HTML, hell, right? You're actually getting to do some more exciting work now, which is moving things forward.
Absolutely, yeah. People are really happy to see their work come to life, because in previous years we've been really focused on constant migrations to Flash, from Flash to HTML, but now we're really ramping up, and also building stuff in the cloud directly. And I do believe that these UIs would converge in one way or another, also when it comes to the hybrid scenario.
Yeah, that's also going to be important, right? Which is good. Going back to like flings and the idea that there are still flings, there are still people testing, pushing, wanting new features. Is that still active? I know there's a lot of activity when we were doing the migration and looking for features to solve things. How is that playing out these days? Are people still innovating around GUI elements that they're looking to test?
more than ever, actually. So let me give you just one example. So you've probably heard about the cross vCenter vMotion utility. It's one of the most popular flings out there, which was started by William Lam and some folks from the vCenter backend team. So uh, once I just reached out to William and asked him some questions about community or something like that. So he came back and was like, "Oh, you are from the UI team, right? I really want us to build some kind of plugin on top of the cross vCenter vMotion utility." I was like, "Okay, you came to the right place." So the next VMware Hackathon, we assembled a team of just 3 UI engineers when we implemented the whole UI of the tool as a plugin. We shipped it in the next Fling release. And at that time, there were 4 years of kind of convincing everyone that this is really important feature. We got great feedback and so on, but we never really got the priority to ship it and productize it. And when the plugin went out, we checked the internal telemetry data. It turned out that the plugin is in top 15 of all plugins that have been installed in the last few months, and this is for a plugin which is not officially supported by VMware. As you can imagine, when you're armed with data and feedback, it's very easy to get things to get productized. So the cross vCenter vMotion was productized in the, I think, 7.0 U1C release last December. So flings are still being used a lot, and exactly to be able to get feedback, improve on your idea, and get people on board with that and ultimately productize.
So, just because people are listening to this podcast, I think 3,000 or 4,000 just do it audio. Repeat what that fling was again. It was vMotion in vCenter.
Cross
Explain that again.
Yeah, it's cross vCenter vMotion utility fling.
All right. So cross vCenter vMotion. Explain what that is.
Oh, okay. So it's a utility which allows you to vMotion VMs between vCenters which are not in linked mode. So you essentially, the tool would authenticate to vCenter 1, authenticate to vCenter 2, and initiate vMotion. Why? Because vMotion API supports it since 6.0 of vSphere, but the UI never had it. And it never had it because it's always focused on the current vCenters in the current linked mode environment. So it was still thought of as a kind of vCenter UI,
Right. Okay.
So this feature didn't get productized for some years, and now it is.
Nice.
And we are still looking for feedback.
Right. So I get that some of the UI engineers that understand the plugin architecture could come in and do a hackathon and make something like that happen. Are there other people that have done some projects that have made it up into Fling status that are outside the company or maybe from partners? Is that realistic to think that, if I were an external person, that I would be able to learn enough to do this?
Oh, so yes, this has become easier and easier from the perspective of consumption, but also from the perspective of development. We have a number of tools to be able to build a remote plugin, and also what we've seen people doing is they have some kind of a standalone UI for whatever job they need. With the remote architecture, it's a lot easier to just get this already built UI and embed it into the vSphere client.
Nice. Yeah. Okay, back to kind of a store for plugins. Like, where are people getting most of their plugins these days?
Yeah, it's a pain point. Let's put it this way. So at the moment, you have, as I mentioned, three actors: the VMware, the partner, and the user. So the user would get the solution, the license and the solution itself directly from the vendor, and then install it following their custom installer. And unfortunately, especially on-prem, we as VMware are not part of this process, but there are efforts for us facilitating this, not only communication but also installation process as a form of marketplace. Now I can't comment on timelines and stuff, but at the moment we do have a cloud marketplace, a VMware marketplace in the cloud. And the vision there is that the marketplace UI would be integrated at different levels in the public cloud and in the private cloud as well.
That stuff never works.
Okay,
I've looked at, how many, I've been here 15 years and I've never seen a store.
It is a challenge.
Right.
I take it as a challenge, and yeah, we will discuss again on that.
Right. Right. But I would say that having kind of like what Apple and Windows has done, where you actually just have a good way of downloading these things off the web and having a way for them to, end up on the plugin server or whatever that is, a smooth way for individual partners and ecosystem participants to be able to put this on their own website and then have a URL that goes and picks it up and pulls it and installs it seamlessly. I think that the reality of the way I go get all my drivers and all my plugins and everything is I don't go to a central store, because the problem with stores for me is that, whatever's in the store is usually a year old or 2 years old. It's never the current, like it never is what I really need. And so I end up going to the vendor and figuring out what I need to go, and the vendor explains it anyway. So having this whole centralized model, where if you have a really good decentralized model that really works well, I'm a fan of that, right? Like, now maybe a store will work too. I'm not saying it, never say never, but yeah.
I do believe in the on-prem version of this picture, which in my mind is called content library.
Right.
And facilitating the ability to store your content in your on-prem, and also the second part of this is how you deploy it easily from the vSphere UI, for example, and not jumping through different scripts and different tools to get it running. Right.
Okay. So we talked update 1, manifest. Anything else out there that we should mention?
As we were talking about more dynamic experience, we introduced the dynamic extensions for plugins. So generally, plugins have been having this filtering capability for their UI bits. For example, if a user doesn't have a privilege to execute a backup action, it should not be shown. And with local plugin architecture, these filtering capabilities were per extension, meaning that for each action you would say, oh, this should be shown if this and that is true. But just evaluating this condition means doing a separate hop to a separate call to the plugin backend. So if you have 6 actions, you would do 6 calls to the backend, and you would wait for the results to populate the UI, or with, for example, 3 of the actions which are available. With the remote plugin architecture, with dynamic extensions, we are doing it a lot more effectively. So we've implemented it as an SPI, service provider interface, which means that we define a contract and we tell the plugin server, the vSphere UI will call you at this endpoint and would expect an answer in this format. So we would say, you have defined 3 actions here. Reply with the availability of each of those. So you would get action 1 is enabled, action 2 is disabled, action 3 is enabled, and we will populate the UI.
Nice. I got my personal feedback as long as I'm talking to a UI engineer, like here's my 2 cents. Could you just show everything and then have like a lock signal for ones that I can't get? These magical disappearing features drive me absolutely crazy because I go, oh, it's here. It's in the menu. It should be the 3rd one. And they're like, we don't see it. We don't know. It's not there. And I'm like, well, I'm looking at it. And it's like, oh my God. It's like, I hate those things.
Yeah. So there are UX guidelines on that for partners, but also for internal UI development. And these state that if a condition will never be true, then just hide it. If the condition might be changed, for example, you might get new permissions, then it's better to show it and have it as disabled, or leave it as enabled, and when you click you get some notification that you don't have sufficient privileges. So
luckily I'm getting old and I'll die soon, and then I'll just go away the dinosaurs, right? Like I'm a fan of, because in web design we do this also. They do personalization on web design where, depending on where you're coming from, what your cookies are set or whatever, nowadays they'll actually give you a different website, right, based on your preferences and your cookies and your that kind of stuff. And it's annoying because I just want to say, like, could we just make one big flat list website where you go in and everything is there, and I could just scroll down and find it myself, right? Or I'll use the Control F search and find what I'm looking for. But the minute you go dynamic, you can't search it, you can't find it, it's not there anymore, and somebody's telling me it's supposed to be there, but it's not. And now I have to go somewhere, and it's a community nightmare because I go on a forum and I say, well, I can't make this happen. What's going on? And somebody has to say, well, you probably don't have permission to see it, right? And I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. So, yeah, or I don't even know it's there. So that's like, yeah.
Feedback taken.
Yes. Good luck with that. No, it's never going to happen, right? But that's what I would say is that I'm an old school, list everything, because then we can learn what we don't know, right? So, yeah. But anyway. But on the other hand, that's against the current model of making it easy, right? Which is, if you get too much stuff listed everywhere, it just gets complicated, right? Because now you see all this other stuff you need to learn, and it's not relevant to what you want to do. So I can see the other side of it as well.
And it's also about scalability as well.
Yeah.
And what devices you're using and the size of your screen.
Yeah.
Accessibility is also an important hot topic.
You learn that when you go into the countries that are further away from wherever the server is, that these big lists become problematic because they're waiting. Somebody told me like it takes 2 minutes and 80 seconds, 2 minutes and 42 seconds for the whole thing to load, and I'm like, wow, it takes me like 12 seconds, like So there is that. There is scalability across network connectivity too that makes a difference. All right, so that's good. I always say, as we come up, I know we've been recording for now 48 minutes, so I always get a transition in the last few minutes, like what excites you? What are you excited to work on this year? I know you can't obviously tell us specifically, feature sets or anything, but in this space, what are you excited about? What are you trying to maybe accomplish over the next rest of the year as we go into our 22 year?
Okay, I will split it in 2 parts. Technically, it's we actually already talked about it. Technically, it's looking into ways to do marketplace to make it easy for end users to install solutions. As simple as that. Not so simple to implement and architect, but we are on top of that, and I really believe that we will have something really good. With regards to the community, my goal, also as a VMware code coach, is to get more engineers into the V community, because when an engineer joins the V community, there are certain things that they can share from internal experience, certain features, and get direct feedback from users. And this is basically where innovation starts. So I'm very happy that as part of the vSphere UI community team that we just started, we already have like 15 volunteers willing to blog and record videos and so on. So let's see how this is going.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, especially now as we transition into developers working in influencing where compute is deployed, right, and how it's deployed and what it's doing when it's deployed, right, where there used to be this separation and now there's not separation. Now it's the engineering teams are actually just consuming compute resourcing directly in their projects, and it gets out and gets deployed, which cloud certainly has had a huge impact on that, right? Yeah. And then obviously you're refactoring into Kubernetes, which is Kubernetes is just another runtime framework, right? But it's like we're transitioning out of Windows land, right? Where it used to be your apps ran on Windows servers somewhere. Now your apps are dynamic and running all kinds of little workloads, pods, web services. And so having the infrastructure work with developers is key. And so there is a bit of me that wonders, because I put my VMware Code hat on sometimes, whether, as we transition into cloud, the community itself is going to have to change, right? Like where it used to be community of IT administrators, and I know where I love IT and I love administrating. I love having machines and root passwords and, my own home servers and that whole thing. But if you look at it, the challenges are changing where you have cloud services now. I have an AWS instance, right? We have stuff in AWS and I don't have to rack and stack and install anymore, right? Like as much as I did. But we do have to engage with the app people, right? That are building the apps and running the apps and running them anywhere. So to some degree, I feel like the IT administrator job is downsizing, right? Like, or getting is less important. Right. And the VMware Code type of profile where you're automating or you're engaging with engineers to offer up compute resources to the application directly or the application team directly is becoming where the growth of the industry is happening. And that's kind of where all of us have to start migrating our careers. Not that we have to stop becoming vSphere administrators, because if I went to VMUG and said, hey, how many people are doing vSphere daily work, they'd all raise their hands. Yes, they are, right? Like that still pays the paychecks. But I see this transition happening, right? So I appreciate you, engaging with VMware Code and actually creating a subgroup where people can go do projects and write code and learn about it. And I guess the question is, do we think it's all about writing code, or is there practices that they can learn that isn't necessarily writing the code, but learning how the code works or engaging with infrastructure as code? Where do we see that? As an IT administrator, sometimes people go like, I don't write code. I can't code. I don't know how to code. And I'm not sure I want to learn how to code. So there is always this question I have in my own mind of whether or not we're trying to take people that really are, IT guys and trying to teach them to be developers, right? And where does that? Some people like it. Some people cross over. I certainly cross over. I like to write some code now and then. Where do you see that?
Yeah. Well, I think when you just say code, some people are just getting scared for no reason. And I really enjoy what I'm seeing from some fellow VMware folks. For example, we have Nico Wiebert and Patrick Kramer, who are doing really basic sessions about how you can just start building stuff. Let's not call it coding. Just start building stuff.
Right.
So I really think we need to have more of these in the community. And another side of this story is that folks who are doing APIs, folks who are doing SDKs and tooling need to also step up and really lower the entry bar to build something new.
That's actually a really good point, right? Which is if you ask our IT administrator crowd, all the guys that I know, and you said, do you like to build stuff? Everybody would raise their hand. 100 people in the room would all raise their hand and go, yeah, we love building stuff. That's why we rack and stack and we connect things. That's why I ended up in IT, because I liked hands-on, engaging, building, making a network happen, accomplishing that. I think you're right. When you start seeing development, it scares people because it's just a scary term to go like, oh, I got to learn to be a developer. I have to learn how to set debug points and break points, and like, where if you approach it as like no, we're just going to build something, right? And there are some software components to building, but it's not scary. It's just you've already done a lot of this already, right? You've written scripts and you've done this kind of stuff. It's just a slightly different way of doing it that is not that far a leap. And so, yeah, I think one of the is it Microsoft that does their conferences Build, right? So we named it VMware Code because it's code, right? Like, but there's a bit of me that goes, oh darn, like I thought Code was a great code name for the community, and it still is. But there is this element of Build that probably is a bit easier to attract people to. Yeah.
If you ask the group of administrators how many of you have done complex bash scripts, I think many of them will raise their hand.
Yeah, that's right.
But if you told them about coding, they will say, no, I'm not doing coding. But bash.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So maybe we'll do that with VMware Code. We'll try to put a little bit of build brand into it so that it's a easier thing to think about, right, and engage with. Yeah. That's great. Well, we're coming up to the top of the hour. Another question for you: are you on Twitter? Can people follow you? Where is the best way for people to pay attention to Vladimir Velikov? Right? Did I say that right? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's I have a Twitter. It's Vladi_Velikov, and also the Twitter of the vSphere UI community team is vSphere UI _team.
All right.
So please,
nice.
Just shoot me a DM, anything, if you have questions on plugins, on anything else.
All right. Now, are you one of these guys that if they follow you, will you follow them back? So you can get that connection, right? Are you a cross follower on Twitter? Do you sometimes?
Let's say 50-50.
Nice. Yeah. All right. There you go. All right. Well, good. Thank you very much for doing the work on code that you do. I know it's exciting. So you can go over to code.vmware.com and join. There's code Slack channels. I assume that you're probably in a Slack channel as well over there that people can find you on. I know you're doing a group. I know you're doing sessions. So you're doing sessions and you have a group of people that are doing that. So thank you for that. And thank you for coming on. And we'll make it a point to loop back with you guys to share interesting projects coming out of the GUI teams, right? Because I think it does sometimes not get as much attention as we should probably be giving it. So appreciate you being here.
Looking forward to that. Appreciate your invite.
All right. We're at the top of the hour. So thank you for listening all the way to the end. If you want to go over to see what we look like, we do live stream on vBarbecue on YouTube. So youtube.com/vBarbecue. You can go there and give us a like and a follow if you want to and see what we look like. We're not big live stream people. We're just sitting here on Talking Head camera, but you can go see what we look like. For vBarbecue this week, you know what? We haven't done any barbecue. Tony Foster said he didn't do any barbecue. barbecue. He did barbecue the Twinkies last week, which was an interesting marshmallow kind of experience. I did some steaks. You know, there's standard steak stuff. You grill them 3 minutes on each side. You just keep flipping them until the inside gets to be 135, and then you have a perfect steak on a charcoal grill. So that's always a easy, fun one to do. We did do a pork rub, so we got some pork loins and did standard pork rub. You know, just a rub, Mr. Stubbs barbecue rub out of Austin, Texas. They're there. That's a good one to go if you've never seen Mr. Stubbs. It's a dry rub, does pretty well, pretty good. You just rub that on, and then you do the same thing with a pork loin on a barbecue. Just flip it, you know, a couple times. It takes about maybe 20 minutes to cook it. And then you're looking for 145 internal meat. So you need a meat temperature. You always want to have a meat thermometer. And then you always want to be flipping every 3 minutes on a piece of meat. And that's what we did. That was the V Barbecue for this week. We will be here again next week with Matt Lungoth. He'll be back. Until then, everybody have a great week. Thanks a lot for listening.
Thanks a lot.